Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. I'm Laura, and in today's video, I want to go over onboarding and getting up to speed as a new hire. In the past, I thought that as a new hire, your job was to just understand everything as quickly as possible, and also just to get thrown into the fire a little bit, even if you didn't actually know everything that was going on. However, taking a step back from it, starting a new job, whether you are a new grad or a senior, is scary for anyone, and if you're moving roles, then that change is even scarier. Depending on how senior you are, the amount of time that you're given to actually ramp up, though, is going to be a little bit different than if you're a new grad, but typically speaking, from a new grad perspective, your main job is to just learn. At the new grad level, we're just given a little bit more leniency, and you're not expected to be solving severity 0 customer tickets right off the bat. I want to highlight the 3 different principles of onboarding and getting up to speed, and those are broken up into focus on meeting people, focus on reading documentation, and focus on getting the details and technicalities right. I'll deep dive into each of these, but I hope from an overview you can start to see how these parts intertwine and how they actually work to make you a better employee than you trying to rush in and solve all the problems on day one. The first task or principle is to focus on meeting people. Other people are going to be the most important part of your career, whether you like it or not. Your manager is going to be a huge part of your job, whether that be on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis, but they are the go-to person for you now. Your manager is going to be your go-to person for talking about projects, getting unblocked, talking about career planning, and so much more. So it's really important to establish a relationship with your manager and to really set your priorities and intentions very early on, and just to make sure that your manager understands what your goals are, who you work best with, and the kinds of interests and projects that excite you. Now, your manager is just one person in this whole grand scheme of organizations, and unless you're in a startup, you're probably going to have to work your way up through the corporate ladder in some way. Especially as a PM, the people that you know can make a world of difference, and the more friendly and collaborative you are, the better your name gets out there, and the more you start to become known and you build a brand for yourself, etc. Even from an engineering perspective though, that personal brand can be very helpful, and you can just start to be known as that person who's really collaborative and friendly on your team. One thing that interns are definitely shielded on is that when you come to work as a full-time employee, you are bringing a reputation with you. When coming in full-time, if you have a good reputation about you, then that will also help other people sing your praises. The opposite is true, where if you come with a reputation that can be a little bit harder to work with, then other people can also start to just kind of not want to work with you as much. Zooming out a bit though, when projects and work start coming in, you'll inevitably have to work with other people and ask for help. Depending on your personality, it can just be a touch embarrassing to ask someone for help whom you never talked to before, and for me, I would feel a lot less awkward if I've had a conversation with them beforehand. Which all culminates into the actual piece of advice here, which is to set up one-on-ones with everyone on your team, and everyone on immediate teams that your team may work with a lot. This will usually end up being in the ballpark of anywhere from 5 to 15 people, but I promise you that just making the effort to introduce yourself and get to know the other person will make a world of difference in terms of friendliness and getting past that awkward transition. Now, this doesn't have to be a long meeting, just a 30-minute one-on-one, very casual, but you can also start to turn it into a place in which you can get to know them and what they work on. Take the time to ask questions about what they do, because that'll help form a picture of what your team does, and it'll also help contextualize what your team's role is with respect to this other team if you're speaking to someone else, or just to contextualize the different roles and parts that your team plays if you're talking to someone just on your internal team. After the past 3 months though, I can safely say that having context and direction is going to be the most crucial part of onboarding and feeling like you actually know what you're doing. If you don't have context, then it's hard to make decisions, and if you don't have direction, then it's also hard to make decisions just in different ways. Without context, you don't really know what impacts a decision may have, and without direction, it's hard to just know which decision is the best decision out of a pool of them. I also utilize this as a time to get advice from people. So if someone was a manager, then I might ask for their perspective in shifting from an individual contributor into a lead role. Again, don't stress out, these are pretty casual, and most people are happy to spare even 30 minutes of their time just to welcome someone new. Remember that pulling the intern or student or new grad card is always going to be the most valuable, and you have a limited time frame, so to speak, but really you're still learning and new even after 1 or 2 years at the company, so don't be afraid to use that. The second pillar I want to focus on is focus on reading documentation. Now, hear me out. I know that reading documentation is not going to be the most exciting thing that you can spend your time on, but it will be the most valuable. Documentation is a great way to just start getting context on things. From an engineering perspective, there should hopefully be lots of documentation for you to get started with. This could be internal API documentation, this could be architecture reviews, or something of the sorts. Regardless though, the more you start to familiarize yourself with these different documents, the better off your understanding will be, and you also haven't had to bother anyone else by asking them questions. I really do think that a high-level overview though is always going to be valuable before you really dive into the deep parts of a system. Knowing a part of a system particularly well, especially if that's the area that you're working on, is going to be important, but it's also important to know how that system plays into the overall project or product. Documentation also shouldn't just be limited to team or technical things. Of course, on the PM side, there will be tons of guides, like operation guides or how-to guides for specific tools or pipelines or processes, but there are also general documents like how to utilize your benefits and other details like investment advice. This is also definitely an important part of your onboarding process. I would definitely also take the time to explore benefits that your company provides, any employee resource groups or interest groups that might help you find a sense of community, and just any other ways to share knowledge or find knowledge that other people have shared, just publicly speaking. In your whole documentation process, I think you'll also find note-taking to be really valuable. I kept and still do keep a list of glossary terms or good things to know that I just jot quick notes into whenever I find something new. In the beginning for me, it was a lot of how to use X tool, and over time I also start to add just different processes that I see or different things that I've shadowed and that I want to just keep in my memory for future reference. If you also note down any questions you have while reading these documents, it can be a great opportunity to ask your mentor, your onboarding buddy, or your manager some of these questions, again, just to break down the knowledge barrier and bring you one step closer to where you need to be a contributing member of your team. Now, the third and last thing to focus on here is really diving into the details and the technical side of things. This is usually the most exciting part, at least for me, because you actually get to dive a little bit deeper and just get hands-on. Utilize this power effectively. With respect to processes and projects, if you're still feeling a little bit unconfident, then the best way I feel to build up that confidence is just to shadow another member on your team. I found this strategy helpful for me because there are a lot of tools and processes that I just wasn't familiar with or weren't documented, so seeing someone else go over this and just go over it in a call with them was the easiest way to communicate the information and also answer any questions off the bat. It'll also be immensely helpful for you to document this as you learn, because you can either pass this knowledge down in a new document, which is a huge win, or it just helps you memorize it a little bit better, and in the future when you inevitably forget it, you can always come back to your notes. I highly err on the side of writing more things down than I think I need to, because I know that I don't have a great memory, and if I forget something, then that'll be on me and that'll be my mistake and my fault. To prevent any future errors from happening on my end, I've now made it in an effort to just write down most things I hear, and if I don't need them, then I'll erase them or take them out of my notes. With respect to also getting involved in the technical side of things, I think that attending as many meetings as you're invited to or that pique your interest are also really helpful. This helps you get familiar with the key stakeholders or the people involved with a given project, and in these weekly discussions or updates or syncs, you'll often find that there are points of contention, and you can really start to dig deep into what these problem areas are, and you can even make a contribution in your early weeks if you're good about teasing out these problems and understanding the whole context and scenarios around them. Soon enough though, I promise that you'll be participating and contributing in these conversations, even if it feels like you're just sitting on mute for the entire hour of the hour-long sync. Those are the three key principles: focus on meeting people, read documentation, and then getting involved in the technical details. Don't be afraid of downtime. This is the one thing that I've learned a lot, that downtime is really just an opportunity for you to learn, and really as new grads, we are often faced with a lot of downtime, which is a blessing in disguise. Take this time to learn, breathe, and give yourself enough time to really understand every complex little detail that your team may ask you to understand in the future. But most importantly, I want to remind you that if you still feel overwhelmed, I promise that you're doing your best, and a lot of people take things in differently, and they also just take a different amount of time to learn things. Don't beat yourself up, and remember to communicate this to your manager and your team if you really are feeling overwhelmed, burnt out, or just way too stressed out. Don't get too preachy, but just make sure to prioritize yourself and your mental health as well as your overall well-being. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll see you all again next week for a brand new video. Bye.